Ho! What's going on, YouTube? My name is SlapHappyGreen, and welcome to a little bit of a wherewithal. Last 2 days has been the opening days of the group stages of Columbus 2016 CS Major, hosted by MLG. You guys can see the teams that are competing on the screen in front of you. We got Envious, we got Navi, we got FaZe, we got Nip, all the rest of those guys there. So, been heavily watching it the last couple of days. Just wanted to give a lowdown on my thoughts and opinions on some of the teams, some of the games, some of the good, the bad, and the ugly, maybe even. Um, wasn't able to do day one yesterday because I had work yesterday, which means I had to spend a lot of time out, not able to see the games. I had to watch what I could of them at a later date to try and get a sense of what happened in some of the games. But I've got notes, I've got information here that I wrote down, wanted to keep an eye on. And I'm going to start with day one. Now, of course, for our groups, for Group A, we had Nip, FaZe, Team Liquid, and Flipside. Group B was... Oh, wait, no, hold on. Group A was Nip, Flipside, LG, and Mouse. Group B was FaZe, Team Liquid, Splice, and Fnatic. C was Astralis, Gambit, Envious, and CLG. And Group D was Navi, C9, Virtus.Pro, and G2. Day one featured 2 matches in each division, 1 legend team versus 1 challenger team. First match was Nip, the Ninjas in Pajamas versus Flipside Tactics. Now, this is a little bit of an interesting tournament for Ninjas in Pajamas because they replaced Alu with Pyth. Pith, I don't know how you want to pronounce that. After the last major. However, unfortunately, Ninjas were unable to secure him a travel visa for the major, so he was unable to make it. He's being replaced in the lineup by their coach, Threat, and a lot of people believe that this is going to leave them with a little bit of a weaker lineup going into this tournament because although he is their coach and although he's a decent player in their own rights, he's used to being their coach and strat caller from the sidelines, not from in the lineup. And it just puts a whole lot of extra stress on him being in the game rather than seeing the game from the outside looking in. And that was it actually looked like that was kind of apparent in the first game. Not to say that Threat didn't have his moments where he did some good work. He had a couple of clutches in the game that helped Nip win the first match against Flipside. First map, Nip versus Flipside was played on Cash. Both teams ended up playing very heavily T-sided. One theme that we've seen so far in this major is a lot of overtime. Day one was not really any exception to that. First map, Nip versus Flipside ended up going to overtime. First 2 halves were both 9-6 T-side, but eventually just the extra skill, the extra tactics, the extra ability of the Nip players like Get Right, like Freiburg, allowed them to get past Flipside. It wasn't really an overly impressive win for Nip, but they did show that they had the wherewithal and the push to be able to pull out the win, even though with Threat in the lineup rather than Pyth, they're seen at maybe a little bit more of a disadvantage than an advantage that they would with their proper full lineup. For second map, fortunately I don't have a visual for this one. LG versus Mouse. This was played on Mirage, and of course Mirage is the map that LG has had the most success on in the past, I guess you could say. It was one of their biggest maps when they were first busting into the scene and being seen as a big team in CSGO. The first half of this match went actually pretty chained, pretty aggressively momentum based. Not ninjas. Mouse Sports ended up winning the pistol and getting first couple of rounds in the match, giving them a little bit of a lead, forcing LG to try and come back and string together some rounds for a good half, which they managed to do. If I remember correctly, which I unfortunately don't have down right with me right now, it ended up as roughly a 10-5 half. Hold on, just let me double check this real quick. Mouse LG. Mouse and LG. Yes, it did end up being a 10-5 half. Started off with Sports taking the lead, Luminosity coming back, eventually stringed around together some rounds to lead the half 10-5 going into the second, going into their T side. Mouse actually had the better half. They ended up winning 8 CT sided rounds to Luminosity's 6. But the one thing that I noticed a lot from Mouse's CT side is that a lot of the time they would get caught on the rounds that LG would win. They would get caught over rotating. Luminosity would push for some frags, try and fill out the defense on one side of the map, and then once they kind of got a feel of what they thought Mouse Sports was throwing at them, they would swing around to the other side and catch Mouse Sports maybe rotating back or maybe on a site where they weren't quite as strong anymore because some of their players were focusing more on the other side of the map. And unfortunately, this put a big dent in Mouse Sports' attempt to try and come back. And not helping that was the fact that Cold Zera and FNX for Luminosity, even fair, were having huge game for Luminosity. A lot of that was on their CT side when they pushed for their comeback rounds from the early deficit. But to be honest, a lot of the rounds that Mouse Sports did get were just as much in part to a very aggressive playing Nico and Chris J, both of which combined for 50 frags in the map. I mean, without those two players playing as well as they did, it probably would have been a lot different of a score. It probably would have been a much more one-sided score because Nico and Chris J was opening up a lot of rounds with some good early picks, and Nico was clutching out a lot of rounds where they were maybe having a little bit of trouble finishing, but he was in the right spot at the right time to get the frags that they needed. Going into Group B, first match of the day was FaZe versus Team Liquid. For this match, in all honesty, this match could have gone very differently. It went 12-3 for Team Liquid in the first half, with Team Liquid starting T-sided. But there were a number of rounds where players on Liquid came out with some huge clutch plays. Hiko had a 4K. Dren had an incredible 4K clutch where he got 3 picks and in B from checkers, grabbed the bomb, and went all the way around to A site, planted, managed to pick up the last guy for a 4K and a round win. I think if we look at the frags from the match for Liquid, a lot of it was fairly even. Nitro leaded the pack with 25 frags, Dren with 22, Elige at 18, Hiko at 16, Simple at 15. In that game, Simple was actually probably the least noticeable of Team Liquid's players. He didn't have the strongest game, but some of the great offensive plays from players like Dren, Hiko, Nitro in certain rounds allowed them to pick up rounds that FaZe probably should have had. Like even with FaZe, players like AZ, players like Fox, players like Rain, they played very they played a decent game, but on CT side they missed a lot of frags that they should have been traded out, that they should have gotten, picks that they should have had. And Mikalele and Jakam kind of had slow games. Jacob finished 9 and 21. Mikalele only at 15-19. And the only one that was actually over 20 kills with a positive KDR for FaZe ended up being Rain. Now, a lot of that had to do with the fact that they brought out a little bit of a comeback on T side. They managed to win 8 rounds to Team Liquid's 4. And they started out with those wins. So they were putting on the pressure, they were pulling out the comeback. But once Team Liquid started getting those T-sided rounds, those CT-sided rounds, uh, they just wouldn't be denied on the map. They managed to walk away with a win. To be honest, I would have preferred it if they'd have been a little bit closer, because this could have been a closer match. This should have been a closer match. Like this, as far as the skill of both of these teams, I think when both of these teams are playing at their best, that this is actually a very even match. Like this is one match that I was actually surprised didn't go into overtime, because I thought it would have been a lot closer than the score suggested. But FaZe Clan struggled mightily on CT side, and even on T side. Like there were a couple of rounds, especially early on their T side, that that could have easily gone Liquid's way and could have made an even huger gap between the scores at the end. Coming to mind would be the second round of the second half, where Liquid nade stacked A main and brought down 3 players on FaZe to under 10 health before they even got out of A main. But fortunately, first contact on entry in that round ended up being, I believe it was Rain, who was coming out of Squeaky. And so he hadn't been hit by the nades that the other 3 teammates had. So he was able to get, I think it was 2 kills on A before anybody else was able to start picking off players on FaZe. I mean, if you have one of the main players reaching that first contact, Liquid actually probably gets first frag, because first contact, first player that he attacked ended up dropping him down to about 69 health before he finally finished him off on A site. So if one of the other 3 guys had gone in there first, he would have picked up that kill, maybe even one more, depending upon who got to him second, and then all of a sudden it's a different round. Maybe Liquid picks that up, and now instead of it being 12-5, it's now 13-4. Liquid has the better by going into the third round, and then maybe they pick up the momentum and run away with CT side before FaZe is even able to get to 5-6 rounds. So, just trying to think. Is there anything else that I have here? One other thing that I have down here that I noticed a lot from this match is that both teams on their T side were very heavily leaning towards A. Out of 15 rounds, I think Liquid went towards A site like 9, 10, maybe even 11 times. Like they did not push a lot on B. Whereas FaZe, out of their 12 rounds, I think at least 7 or 8 were towards A. Not all of their wins, not all of their 8 wins were towards A, but a lot of the rounds that they did push sites, they were pushing towards A. A couple of mid plays, a couple of B plays, but mainly more towards the A plays for both teams. Alright, so the other match of... Oh, jeez. The other match of... Oh, crap. Wrong button. Other match of Group B, which unfortunately, again, like with the LG mouse match, I don't have a specific team's logo for to go over. FaZe versus Splice. I'm sorry. This is the first time I'm doing this. First time I'm doing this kind of a video, so kind of starting a little bit. Train match, and this would actually become a little bit of a trend towards the end of day one. Fnatic Splice would be on train, and then there were another 3 matches out of the remaining 4 that would also take place on train. So day one ended up being very heavily train played, starting with this Fnatic Splice match. And it was basically what you would expect from a match between these two teams. Now it ended up being 13-2, ended up being 16-5, 13-2 in the first half, Fnatic on T side, and then 3-3 each on second half. But in a lot of ways, this match was never really in doubt. The only rounds that Splice won on their CT side was their first gun round, with which Fnatic automatically came right back and reset their economy with. And then a little bit later, Davey, I think it was about 3 or 4 rounds later, Davey picked up another round where he came up absolutely with a huge clutch. And then on the second half, they managed to win pistol on T side, and then they picked up the 2 afterwards. And then Fnatic just said, first gun round, pick it up, and then we'll just run you right through to the end. After that point, Fnatic just never looked back on their CT side and finished off Splice very quickly. Again, I'm going to touch about this a little bit later when I talk about Fnatic's match today, but it wasn't really about huge plays from any particular player on Fnatic. They both had their rounds where they played well. They both had their maps where they helped the win. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, I'm not the best of health today, so I don't know exactly how well my voice sounds right now, and I'm probably not going to try and have this video be too long. Unfortunately, because I'm covering both days, it'll be a little bit longer than tomorrow's video should be. But yeah, for Fnatic, it wasn't really about any particular superstar plays. Of course, there were a couple of rounds where certain players had to come up with a little bit extra to get around, but for the most part, Fnatic dominated. And for Splice, they had 2 rounds really where Davey went ham, and that was the second round that they picked up on CT side. He had a good first half and was one of the few to do it. And Professor Chaos had a decent round for himself where he took a Mag 7 to ladder and got a couple of good kills, but teammates around him weren't able to do anything with the frags that he got, and unfortunately they weren't able to pick up that round. But other than those 2 plays really, where a couple of players on Splice showed some good individual talent, Fnatic basically just rolled right over them on this map. And it's kind of disappointing because you see a team like this make the major, you want to see them do something with it, but unfortunately they had the disadvantage of going up against Fnatic, the world #1, in their first match. And like, for most of the teams in this major, actually for a fair majority of them, you would have a hard time looking at a match and saying, okay, these guys are going to give Fnatic a run for their money. This should be a good match. This should be a close match. There's only maybe a handful of teams in this major that you can say that about. And Splice is just not one of them. They're just not at that level yet. So that did it for Group B. Left us with our 2 winners of Team Liquid and Fnatic. Going into Group C, first match of C was actually Envious versus CLG. No graphic, unfortunately. And for this match on Cobble, this was the only match of This was the only match of C Division, C Group, and D Group that was not on train. Team Envious actually started out decently. They got the first couple of rounds, they had the lead up till the gun round, and then it just kind of went back and forth for the next couple of rounds. They lost two, they got one, and then they were reset again. They just never really got the push after that to make good distance on their team. Like they started on the T side like that. You expect on Cobblestone to see the T side team pick up 8, 10, 12 rounds at a minimum. And you want to see them pick those rounds up early, get them 5-0, 6-0, 7-0 before you give up a round so that you can keep the pressure on and keep your opponent on CT on their heels. But Envious wasn't able to do that. It ended up being a very close half. They managed to pull it off in the last round to make it an 8-7 half, but you could tell that this was an Envious team that wasn't really in a good spot. Wasn't really making the plays that they were last major. And this is a team that has been struggling lately. They recently replaced Hiroshima with Devil. But other than that, it is the same lineup. You have Apex, you have MBK, you have Kenny S, you have Happy. But these guys never really stole that many rounds on their T side. And then once it went to the second half and Counter Logic got their chance on T, it was just a lackluster CT from Envious. They could not get anything going. They never really got the frags to get any momentum to win any rounds. They never really had the advantage. And Cutler, Tarek, and JDM just kind of ran roughshod. Like you look at the stats for the teams. Fugly went 8-15 in 24 rounds. 8-15. That means he's getting one kill every third round. Other than that, you had Cutler with 28 frags, Tarek with 20, JDM with 18, and Hayes with 17. Hayes was their fourth fragger in that game, and he had more than Happy at 16 and 18, who was the top fragger for Envious in that game. Kenny S then went 15 and 18, Devil went 14 and 17, Apex went 13 and 19, MBK went 10 and 19. Like, Envious played pretty close to one another, but they played close at a lower level than they should have been, than you would expect Envious to be playing at. For a team that, for a long time after the last major, a lot of people were expecting to step up and challenge Fnatic as number one, and then it just never developed. So unfortunately, they just kind of struggled in their first half, and then when they got to the second half, they just kind of faded away, never really getting anything going to be able to put together rounds. Unfortunately, that ended up with the loss for them. Second match of the C group was the very impressive but still lowly regarded Gambit Gaming versus the former TSM, current Astralis, and a good team. Now, of course, like I said, all the remaining games on day one, this game and both D games, took place on train. Astralis started on T side and put together a good, strong T side. It ended up being a 9-6 half. Just looking at my information here. Gambit had the early lead in this game. They were putting on very impressive plays. Mouse, Adren, even Waylander were making good plays to get them good rounds. I think they were up about 5-0 before Astralis got their first round. But once Astralis picked up their first round, they ended up picking up 6 straight to get the lead off of Gambit. And it just seemed like Astralis was taking control. And even after Gambit got their last round of the half, their sixth round, they immediately got reset. And they never found that momentum that they had early on in that first half. And this culminated in a little bit of an awkward end to the last round, to the 15th round, where it was a 2-on-1 on B, and you had one player on Astralis near CT, backed by Connector Train, and the other Astralis player by Oil Tanker, I think it was. Um, the closer player was low, and then the closer player to the bomb, which was the one at Oil Tanker, had a lower health than the guy's CT area. But it actually wasn't a bad positioning for them to be in for Gambit. And I think the last player was Mao, who was the last player alive, to come in and actually have a good chance at this defuse, because he was coming in from uh, lower brown halls, coming into B. He was I don't remember if he'd gone up through ladder or around through T to get into that position, but he was actually coming from behind Astralis, and probably the exact opposite of where they would have been expecting him to be coming from. So it was actually not a bad spot. But he came in with a smoke grenade and I believe a flashbang as well. Seeing that where the bomb was planted, he smoked it out to try and just get the cover on the bomb, which led to one of the Astralis players trying to spray him through smoke, thinking he was trying to ninja. The distraction allowed Mao to get one of the Astralis players, but unable to find the second guy by CT. He kind of panicked a little bit and tried to actually go for basically the ninja after that, try and finding the bomb in the smoke. But because he wasn't able to find it, he was never able to get the fuse together, and he ended up dying to the bomb for 9-6. And it kind of like my talking right now, it just felt really awkward to see him trying to get that play at the end of the half. After Gambit got on the T side, I think they picked up first round, maybe even second, but they never really got any good momentum, any good sustainable momentum going in the second half. They only picked up 4 rounds. Astralis managed to pick up 7 on their. They picked up more CT rounds in 11 rounds of the second half than Gambit did of all 15 in the first half. Right. The 7-4 scoreline in the second half that allowed Astralis to pick up the win was just mainly because Gambit never really managed to get a T side going. They would pick up around here and there, but they would almost immediately get reset afterwards, or they'd pick up a second round and then they would get reset. It just never really pushed for them. I mean, you look at and of course you look at the player stats. It was actually a very even game by Gambit. I mean, I talk about a couple of good clutch plays by Mao, by Waylander, even Adren and Dosia had their rounds where they pulled off some really good plays. But like you see them stay on the scoreline. Mao had 18 frags, Adren had 19, so did Dosia. Hooch had 18, Waylander had 15. Like they were all nice and evenly around one another. But they just got, in so many other rounds, they just got overpowered by Zipix. Device almost broke 30 frags. He ended up finishing with 98, almost 10 more than the highest 2 players on Gambit. Cajun B had 24 good frags. Carrigan only had 13, but a lot of the frags that he got were strong impact frags, whether those were good entries in tight spots or important ones near the end of rounds where things were a little bit tighter. He didn't have a lot of kills in that game, but they were at the right time. Same thing with Dupree, who had 16. So Gambit put up a good fight, but at the end of the day, the extra skill level and experience of Astralis just eventually ended up overpowering what Gambit could do. So that's going to be it for Group D. Group C, moving into Group D. Both of these matches were on train. First one was Navi C9. I was actually really surprised at the beginning of this match because C9, Cloud9 had a very early lead on this map. CT side train. They were up 6-0 early. Hold on, I'm gonna sneeze again. Maybe not. Maybe not. Yeah, okay. They had the 6 round lead early, but once Navi picked up their first round on T side, they only picked up 1 round after that. They ended up finishing the half 8-7, which in itself isn't a terrible CT half on train. I think a lot of people usually consider train to be a much more T-sided map, especially if you have a good tactical team that runs good strats on the map. But unfortunately, when you look at the fact that Cloud9 started the half 6-0, you would think that they would be able to put together a little bit better of a CT side. Maybe try and get as many as 10, maybe even 11 rounds on that CT side, considering how well it started. But they weren't able to string any rounds after those first 6. Actually, for the whole rest of the game after those first 6 rounds, they were never really able to string together rounds. Once they went over to T side, the only 2 rounds that they got in the entire half was the first gun round, which was round 19-ish. Then they got immediately reset again by Navi. And then they didn't get their second T round till round 23 and were immediately reset again. And then that was the end of it for Cloud9 till the end of the game. They just never found that stretch of momentum on their T side. Again, you point out the frags, like they almost had a player that wasn't in double digits. Stewie 2K barely made it to 11 frags. Meanwhile, you've got Navi, their bottom fragger in that game. Zeus and Guardian both had 16 frags. Guardian was 16-11, some good key frags, not a whole lot, but some good key frags. Same thing with Zeus, 16 and 14. Not pushing too much, not focusing too much on getting a lot of kills, but he was getting his kills at the right time. But for Cloud9, the only player that had even 16 frags was Shroud at 16 and 20. Scoodoodle then had 15, Freakazoid had 14, so did Nothing. And then of course you had Stewie 2K at 11. Meanwhile, you've got guys like Seized at 19 kills, Edward at 21, Flamey at 21. There were a number of rounds where Cloud9 could have done something with it if they'd gotten the kills at the right time, but they just lost gun battles, lost positioning battles, peak battles basically, to Navi at the wrong time. And this led to what unfortunately ended up probably being a fairly easy win for Navi, those first 6 rounds aside. I mean, you discount those first 6 rounds where Cloud9 managed to control the game, and they only picked up 3 rounds. 1 CT round, 2 T rounds. It just was not a strong performance once Navi got started in the 7th round. And then, of course, last match of the game. Okay. I'm still on Astralis, aren't I? Yes, I am. Last match of the game was VP and G2. Like I said, again, on train. I actually think, given VP's latest struggles, a lot of people were giving this match to G2 on the night. A lot of people were thinking that they were going to come in, train's map that they're not necessarily bad at. They could be able to put up a decent battle here against VP on train, even though back a little while ago, back when VP was playing really strongly, this was probably considered one of their best maps. Especially for me, as someone who is a VP fan. I actually changed my desktop background to the picture that you guys are seeing on the screen right now, because I think it's just a really nice VP thing, basically. Just the way that VP logo looks against that background. I've always been a huge fan in the pro scene of VP, so to see them struggling as of late, when I saw that train was the map, I was sitting there, I was hoping, I was thinking, oh please, let this be VP making a comeback, because if there was any time where I thought that they might be able to pull their game together, start it going again, this was the right time for them to do it, and this was the right setting for them to do it. You go into Columbus, you go into NA, you go into a setting where, yeah, because you're in the major, there is that pressure on you to compete, to perform, but at the end of the day, it's a new tournament. It's a new moment. You're going up in a group against Navi, C9, G2. Cloud9's a team they should be able to beat easily if they end up having to go up against them. G2 is a team that they should, if they're playing well, match up well against. Even Navi, like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that VP in a match, if it comes down to the right time at the right map, that they should be able to beat Navi if it comes to that. Which, again, later, it's a little bit more on that, but um, so the fact that this ended up being the map, you look at the bans. VP ended up choosing because they were the Legends status team in this match. They had the option. They could either choose to ban 3 maps, in which case, whatever the map ended up being, G2 would be able to choose what side they wanted to start on, or they could choose to ban 2 maps instead of 3, allow G2 to ban 3, and then, depending on what's in, they'd be able to choose a side. VP ended up choosing to ban 3 different maps. They ended up banning Dust 2, Overpass, and Inferno. G2 banned Mirage and Cobble. And out of the 2 random maps that were available, trying to think what they would be. Train would be one. What would the other one be? Dust 2, Overpass, Inferno, Mirage, Cobble. I'm missing a map. Cache. It would have either been Train or Cache. They ended up getting Train, which, in my opinion, I think VP is a much better matchup against most teams on Train than they would be on Cache. Not that they're necessarily slouches on Cache, but I think, especially when they're playing at their best, Train is definitely a map that they have a better game on, and it showed in this match. Like, they were leading most of their entries. They were getting 2 kills before any other guys were coming down. Their entries were spot on. They were getting the frags. They were not getting refragged in return. They were just controlling the entire game. Like, even after G2 called it tactical at 8-0, it still took another couple of rounds before they finally managed to get their 1 round of the entire game on the board. It was just complete domination almost for VP in that game for seemingly almost no reason. Like, just because G2 was not putting forth what they needed to put together a good game. And then Virtus.Pro just said, you guys want to give us stuff? We'll just plow right through you. Why not? I mean, and then after the round that they finally did win, they came back in the next round afterwards, and they just poorly rotated players around in that round, opening up opportunities for VP to then come in, get good kills, get advantage plays, and then all of a sudden, voila, you're automatically reset, and now you're screwed again for the next 2-3 rounds maybe. So it left G2 in a very bad spot, which was kind of unfortunate. Because as happy as I was to see VP win, I honestly think VP getting a much better of a competitive match against G2 in that game would have prepared them better for their game day 2. So just a couple things to go through before I start in on day 2 stuff. Some of the good, bad, just plain bad stuff that I saw at day 1. Obviously, one of the biggest storylines, and it manages to pull through, even though they don't have their normal 5th. They've got Threat instead. Liquid pulls out the fight, gets going against FaZe. Huge match for them, especially when you consider what happened today, which I'll get to in a little bit. Just the amount of pressure that they put on there was really good. Dren had a monster game. Hiko had some monster rounds as well. Just really good to see Liquid firing on cylinders. Even though Gambit lost, in a lot of ways, at their match against Astralis, they played very impressively. Like, yes, they lost. Yes, they I think it ended up being, what was it, 16-9, 16-10, something like that. I can't remember the exact score. Even though it wasn't exactly a close match on the scoreline, if you'd have watched a lot of the game, you would have seen some of the plays that Gambit pulled off, some of the strengths that they showed out there, and it really was impressive, in my opinion. Um, in the MVCLG game, CLG's T-side crush, how they absolutely just bowled over Envious on cobblestone on T-side. Uh, their entries were good. Their post plant positioning was strong, and they were just getting good frags. Like it just didn't give Envious any room to come back once they started taking control T-side. And then again, like we just talked about, the Virtus.Pro just running right through G2 on train. Not necessarily what a lot of people would have expected. I actually think that betting wise, odds were actually considered pretty G2 favored, although I'm not 100% sure on that. So a lot of people were expecting that to at least be close, if not to be a G2 win, and yet Virtus.Pro just came to play. Virtus.Pro just came to play, managed to plow through, and got a pretty convincing win. As far as the bad of day one, I got to bring it back to Mouse Sports' rotates on CT side Mirage. There were a lot of rounds that they could have been a lot more in if they'd have held positioning better. Just some over rotates when they didn't even really need to. Where they just seemed to like kind of get scared of LG pushes, and so rather than waiting for the push, waiting for LG to commit, they started committing themselves over towards the wrong bomb sites, and that allowed Envious to get a lot of backstab plays, some rotate plays, where they managed to get some easy rounds because the sites that they eventually ended up attacking were not as heavily guarded as they should have been. FaZe versus TL. FaZe's aim issues, again, I talked about it when I talked about the game. Could have been a lot more of an even game for FaZe on their CT side. But some missed shots, some missed opportunities to get good frags, to get early frags, and to just put themselves in better positions in some rounds. They make some better shots, they win some aim battles, win some duels, and they maybe have a closer half and maybe actually win that game against Liquid. Timeouts. Envy was just like, talk about an early lead, but in a map where T side is so heavily favored on Cobble, like 80 to 90% of the time, the fact that Envious just couldn't get anything going on their T side after the first couple of rounds, it just left a lot to be desired in that match for the French squad. And it's just not strong play out of them in this tournament. Splice, I wouldn't even necessarily call it bad because it's just such a huge skill level difference between them and Fnatic. It's just such a terrible matchup to see them go up against Fnatic in their first match. But they were just so thoroughly dominated. Like, it's just unfortunate, but it has to be recognized that, yeah, a couple of good performances from players like Davey actually really, other than Professor Chaos's one round where he got a couple of good early frags to try and salvage some rounds in ladder, Davey was really the only person who really performed on that map against Fnatic. He had 19 kills, and the next highest was Chaos at 10. Like, if not for those two guys having some good rounds, nobody on that team would have broken double digits. Going into D bracket, you got C9. There was just really no push after them after their initial lead. They took that 6-0 lead, and then as soon as as soon as Navi started picking up rounds, there just never seemed to really be any pushback. and for a team trying to be able to still be competitive, still be a top team, not just in NA, but in the entire world, you've got to be able to come back from losing rounds and push back. And there just wasn't any of that from C9 in this game. And then probably the biggest low light of the night was G2. Like, just couldn't get anything going, couldn't win battles, couldn't pick up rounds. Uh, RPK played decently, but you look at players like Scream, Smith, Existence, players that you would think, maybe even hope that they're going to come through and have big games for you. Not one of them broke double digits. Oh, wrong button again. Not one of them broke double digits in that game. So it kind of leaves you wondering where this team was, where this team is, and what they're going to do going forward. But that's just day one. Like, I know this is taking a while. Like, this is kind of crazy that this is a 45-minute video, so I actually might split it to keep it from being 2 videos. Actually, I think that's the best thing to do because I actually have a lot to talk about day 2 as well. So I think for attention span purposes, I'm actually going to cut this video here. Hope you guys enjoyed. Just some of my thoughts on the matches and some of the good, bad, and ugly from day 1 at the MLG Columbus Major. Hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, I hope I'll see you guys in the next video, which will be another one of these. But for now, I'm out.